Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 408. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about desert, oases, and unexpected ruins as we go to Sudan.
One more cathedral, I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have two news stories for you. And this time they're both about banking, and they're odd stories. The first one comes from Cuba. Cuba cut off all travel from the U.S., and the problem was that they couldn't find a bank that would work with them. That's right, they couldn't find a bank that would work with the entire country to process the visa fees that are collected and routed to Cuba. That may or may not be related to another story about banking, which is that Americans are renouncing their U.S. citizenship in record numbers. And by record numbers, usually that number is about 500 a year and has jumped to 3,000. And the reason for that is that new regulation that is supposed to keep people from hiding money overseas and not paying U.S. taxes, because the U.S. is one country that does tax you even if you live overseas, has made a number of foreign banks decide they simply don't want to take the money from U.S. expats. And so some of those have decided to renounce their citizenship. For links to both of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'm my own sponsor again this week for Amateur Traveler. Again, if you're thinking about getting a new credit card, check out amateurtraveler.com/credit cards for credit cards that are good for travelers. You'll find the one I use there, which is the Chase Sapphire card. You'll also find some good deals in terms of airline miles you'll get if you sign up for a new card. amateurtraveler.com/credit card. I'd like to welcome to the show Nicholas Bori from I Quit, who's come to talk to us about Sudan. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Hi.
And Sudan is not a country that I'd have to say that anyone else has ever pitched me that we do a show on. It's not a country that gets a lot of tourism.
True, that's true. It's not the average destination, I guess. It's not the easiest destination also to get your foot on. For us, it was really tricky to get the visa to start with.
And tell us a little more about how you ended up in Sudan. This is part of a larger trip, first of all.
Yeah, well, the idea to go to Sudan was based on the route that we decided to take to cross Africa. We decided to take some time from work and do a full trip from South Africa, basically, or from the southern part of Africa, all the way to the north on a route. There was Sudan, which I was both excited to see. I thought it was a very interesting place to visit. But at the same time, we had some worries. Like some people was a bit worried that we were going there.
Mm-hmm. And you see the route through Sudan, you were driving the whole distance from bottom to top of Africa.
Yes, we were going on a truck, on an overlanding truck. I was not driving myself because we were part of a larger group.
Okay. And you mentioned that Sudan was a little difficult. Tell us a little more about some of the difficulties you had just in terms of getting some of the red tape so you could get to Sudan.
It started with, at the moment I was living in Ireland, we were working in Dublin, both me and my girlfriend, and there's no Sudanese embassy in Ireland. So that was a bit tricky. Then the second thing that we found out is that, Sudan is one of those countries that require a visa and require an invitation letter from a local. Mm-hmm. We needed to find a way to do this. We found a person called Walid who was supposed to, we got the contact through a tour agency, and he was going to provide this letter. But it was still tricky because we were leaving Ireland, or we were starting our trip about 4 months before we reached Sudan, and we would not be getting a visa that would last for that long. So basically, if we got the visa at that time, at the start of the trip, it would be expired by the time we get to Sudan. So the alternative was to use this invitation letter, send it to the Sudanese embassy in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and we would process the visa there. So we were basically just going north in Africa and hoping that we will actually get our visa in Ethiopia, because otherwise we would not be able to continue.
And we should say, you mentioned that you had an invitation letter. You didn't get an invitation letter. My understanding is out of the goodness of Walid's heart.
No, unfortunately not. It was,
you paid Walid to invite you to Sudan.
Yeah, the whole visa process was quite expensive. Like, if you take into account, we paid about $170 for Walid's kindness, and then about $80 for the process in the Sudanese embassy in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. And we had to pay $50 more once we arrived to Sudan to register ourselves. So all in all, it was a pretty expensive deal.
Okay. But my impression was the reason you pitched the show is you were so glad you had gone.
Yes, I'm really happy. Now that after you sort out the visa, I would say that it's not very complicated anymore if you had some experience traveling. I wouldn't say that Sudan is a country to go if you have never been outside of your own country. You wouldn't say
go to Canada and then Sudan as your next destination? Okay.
No, definitely not. No, because it doesn't have all the tourism infrastructure. You have to really adapt very well. The language barrier is very high.
Arabic being the language spoken.
Yes, they speak Arabic, and there's not a lot of people speaking English. Even in the hotels and stuff, the English was not great. So it was okay, but I would say that going on your own, if you're not experienced, wouldn't be my first choice.
Okay, but why did you love it?
Well, what I really love about Sudan is that because of this same reason that it's so hard to get in, once you're in, there's basically no other tourists. So it is great if you enjoy seeing a place like it is without being, I don't want to say spoiled by tourism, but it loses its authenticity, its original state. And I've seen this in other destinations sometimes. Sudan is extremely authentic. For some parts, it feels like traveling a bit in time. They also have pyramids.
And I didn't know that until you told me that. I didn't realize that. And when we say pyramids, they are Egyptian pyramids from the Upper Egypt culture?
Egypt invaded the Nubian empire a few times. Also, the Nubians invaded some parts of southern Egypt. So there was the culture was going there and back, there and back. So there's a lot of mix between the Egyptian culture and the Nubian culture in Sudan. Okay. The pyramids that I've seen there are different from the ones that we know in Giza, but they're absolutely beautiful. They're a bit more pointy, a bit more narrow.
Okay.
But they're in the middle of the desert. There's nothing around. In Cairo, you have all the city next to it, basically.
Sure, right.
And it's very crowded. There's a lot of tourism, and there's a lot of people trying to sell you stuff. In this place, Yeah. And in this place where we saw the pyramids in Sudan, it was fantastic. It was like it was only us. We were like about 10 people, and also it was very hot that day. And some of the people went back to the bus after a while, and I was alone with my camera, just walking around these really, really old pyramids on my own, and it was fantastic.
Excellent. What are some of the other highlights? What would you recommend as an itinerary for someone to see? You did the country from south to north.
Exactly. For some personal reasons, we had to leave the trip, this longer trip that I was telling you about, for about 10 days. We left in Ethiopia and we managed to come back. We flew back to Khartoum in the capital of Sudan. So we started there and then we continue with this track to the north. So we saw Khartoum for a few days. It was very interesting as well. The things that I liked the most there were the camel market. There's a camel market on the outskirts of the city, and I never seen one, so that was new.
And this is not a camel market, again, that's done for tourists. This is really where people are buying, selling camels that they are using in everyday life.
Exactly, yeah. Everything you see basically in Sudan is the real thing. So, I mean, there's a few tourism things, but I think they're more for like domestic tourism. So still, it's very authentic. And yeah, the camel market was plenty. There was full of camels. Some, I think, were racing camels.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And the people were really friendly. We were there. It was in the middle of nowhere. It was on the outskirts of Khartoum. And yeah, it was quite an experience.
And were they auctioning off camels, or did you have to go see a guy about a camel, or how does a camel market work? I have no experience, let's say.
No, well, we didn't see very much how they were selling or buying, or maybe they were. I mean, for me, they were just talking. Maybe they were bargaining between themselves.
Got it.
We just walk around a little bit. We managed to get on some camels, and we gave them some money as well. Yeah,
I would picture from the countries that I've seen that have Islamic influence that it would be two people sitting together having tea, probably having a business negotiation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's plenty of tea offers while you're traveling in these places.
Okay.
They're very kind. I also enjoyed the market, which was a normal market. It was not aimed to tourists, but you can find tea. You can buy the traditional clothes they have there, like this kind of like long dresses the men wear. It's called a galabeya or something like this. And I decided to buy one there. It's really comfy, actually, for this type of weather.
For the warm, hot, dry weather of the desert.
Yeah, actually, it's surprising because at least for me, during the day, when it was really hot, it was still really fresh to use it because it gets shadow on all over you and there's some air still going around. So it was quite fresh during the day, but at night, maybe we were like on the desert. A few nights we slept on the desert. You just kind of like close it a little bit when you sit down, and it's warm because at night the desert is a bit coldish. So I thought it was a very appropriate outfit.
Excellent. And Khartoum is a fairly big city, is my recollection.
Well, yeah, it looked pretty big. The center was quite crammed with cars, actually. But I think that was maybe more due to a bit of disorganization and not many traffic lights. I might be wrong.
Okay.
I also enjoyed we went to a few restaurants there that were really great because the rest of our time on the country the food was rather basic.
Okay.
I would say. But in Khartoum, we went to some nice restaurants by the river. The Nile goes there. Actually, in Khartoum is the spot where the two Niles get together. There's the Blue Nile and there's the White Nile. And there they get together.
And when you say fairly basic, I don't know whether Sudanese food is going to be more like Ethiopian food with the fingers and the big pancake, or if it's going to be more like southern sub-Saharan Africa food, or what is the basic food of Sudan?
Well, the food from Sudan is very Arabic.
Okay.
The main things that we had there were falafel, like street food. You will go anywhere, and the basic thing that will give you is like some pita bread and falafel, some tomato, maybe sometimes some onion. It was really tasty. I love my time there.
So a little more interesting, a little more variety than, say, sub-Saharan Africa, where you're getting the ugali and maybe a meat or something like that. Okay.
Basically, a lot of Arabic food, hummus, tabbouleh, all these kind of things. Very tasty.
Excellent. But you were able to try different types of food in Khartoum? There was a little more variety, or it was just better quality food in the big city?
In the big city, it was really, really high quality. Actually, from our whole trip in Africa, the restaurant that we visited, which was a nice restaurant, but it was like not over the top. It was the best food that I had in the whole trip. It was in Khartoum. It was just delicious and such a variety. Like, I wish I would remember some of the names, because like the only ones that I can remember are the usual ones, right? Like falafel, shawarma, tabbouleh, tahine, which is like hummus, but
the sesame sauce.
And then there were some pastries with cheese, some pastries with meat. There were some stews as well. We just ordered we were like a lot of us, and we ordered like a lot of different small plates, and we shared everything.
Okay, excellent. And where else would you recommend that we see when we go to Sudan?
The things that I liked the most about Sudan were, first, maybe the Meroe pyramids.
Right.
These are the ones that I was so happy to see, the ones that I mentioned before.
Right.
That are in an absolutely fantastic landscape, like just perfect sand dunes.
And where are those?
Those are about, I don't remember exactly, I think they are about 200 km north from Khartoum.
Okay.
Definitely north from Khartoum, like a couple of 100 kilometers.
And out in the middle of nowhere, basically.
Yes, everything is in sort of the middle of nowhere. Actually, when we were looking at our route, I checked Google Earth, try to spot the places that we're going to see, and you can check it as well. You start zooming in Sudan with the satellite map in Google Earth, and you will see only one road connecting Khartoum with the north, and then it's really impossible to get lost, I guess.
Well, there is that.
That's what I remember. I remember that I saw only one big road connecting Khartoum, the capital, with the north, with the port that we needed to go to.
Now, you had people who heard you were going to Sudan who were concerned, I'm going to guess, because we haven't had the best news coming out of Sudan over the last decade or so. What was your experience on the ground?
Of course, a bit nervous for all the news that you hear about Sudan, and especially because just before we started our trip in Africa, there was this video that was on the news. An American person did it. It was called something of Islam. It was like a video that made a bit of fun about Islam, and there was like a huge deal in all the Islamic world. What happened in Sudan, in Khartoum, is that they connected that with all Western culture, and they stormed the German embassy and they burned the flags. And so that was the last piece of news that we got before going to Africa. And my girlfriend is German, so she was not really feeling very safe about going there. That was everything we were thinking before. When we arrived, the people in Sudan, I have to say, they're amazing. They're very, very friendly. They're very curious, maybe because of the fact that not so many tourists go there. So when they see a new face, they just approach, and they don't make this generalization that maybe some of them do not like some things about the Western world, but they can differentiate that with you. You're just like a person, you're an individual, and they treat you with respect. They're very friendly, they're very generous as well. And we just only had the best time. We met a few Sudanese people through Couchsurfing, the website. We went for lunch with them. We met their families. We went smoking shisha on the roof with them. And in the middle of the night, we're taking taxis to the suburbs, and no problem at all. Everyone was absolutely friendly.
Okay. And then as I look at the map, your route would have kept you well away from, for instance, Darfur, which is obviously not a good place to be here from 2003 to 2010 or so, as I look. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
What else would you recommend in Sudan?
Well, besides the pyramids, there's another place. Well, there's a lot of ruins. Like in Sudan, in general, what you would see is a lot of Arabic culture, desert, pyramids, ruins, stuff like that. So like if you're interested in all these kind of things, it's a nice place, especially because you will get all of that without a lot of tourism or a lot of influence from international tourism. The second place that I liked the most was a place called Jebel Barkal, which is, Jebel means mountain. There's like a lot of places that are called Jebel something in the Middle East. We were on the road, and suddenly we stopped with the truck. We looked to our right, and there were these huge pyramids in the middle of the road. Like, it was very strange to see that. So we just get off the bus and we start walking towards these pyramids. And next to it, there was this mountain. So it was part of the tour. We could go and climb them. They're not very high. It's about 100 meters high. And they're flat at the top. So from there, you can climb and you can see all the landscape. There was like a sandstorm a bit on the distance. So you can see how a sandstorm looks from afar. That was amazing. And at the foot of this mountain, there's also a lot of ruins from a city called Karima, or a town at the time. And there's some tombs that you can enter, some ruins. This was a sacred mountain for the god Amon, or Amun, from the Egyptians, which came in one of those invasions from the Egyptians, and then they kept on worshipping him. So this was a sacred mountain for that reason. This was like an amazing place as well.
Okay. And it's interesting that they kept on worshiping him, because if I've got my Egyptian history correct, the Egyptians didn't.
I think then in Egypt they started mixing Amon with Ra, which is the god son, I think. So they call it Amon Ra.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Mm-hmm.
But I think that in Sudan they kept calling him only Amon.
And I think that's what I was thinking of when Egypt had a period of time where they became monotheistic for a very, very brief period of time with Tutankhamun's father, as I recall. But that was just... That's a long time ago. We're talking 1500 BC, I think, is what you had in the notes.
Yeah.
Interesting. What surprised you about Sudan? What kind of expectations did you have going in?
Two big things that surprised me were probably, like I mentioned before, the people. That, I mean, I was not expecting the people to be aggressive or anything. Like I learned with my trips that you cannot generalize like that, of course. Actually, the other example that I have was from Iran. I was also there in 2009, just before the presidential elections, when the president Ahmadinejad won. And like a lot of people was worried about me, like, you shouldn't go there, like this is not the time. And I have to say that the people over there were like among the friendliest, most generous people I met. And here was the same. But before I went there, I didn't know that. Or like I said, I was not expecting them to be aggressive, but I was also not expecting the complete opposite like it was. That was one of the things. The other thing was maybe that I didn't expect it to be so authentic. Like I didn't even thought about this fact that it's hard to get a visa. So maybe
there's not a tourism economy.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's even hard to actually get pictures sometimes because you have to request a special permit to take pictures. If you don't have that, you can get into trouble.
So would you say, like, where did you need a special permit to take pictures? At the ruins, for instance?
In the country.
In the country, okay.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. We did this at the same moment when we had to register as visitors in the country, so like in the first few days, and we got this permit. But this is just like an extra thing that you need to pay for. And at the same time, they explain to you that you can take pictures after you pay this fee, but there's still some restrictions. Like all over Africa, I saw this, but in Sudan especially, they don't want you to take pictures of
military installations.
Yeah, this I find, of course, very reasonable. Like military installations, police headquarters.
You get in trouble with that a lot of places. Yeah.
Yeah, with a lot, but like they made a lot of emphasis with bridges, for example.
Okay.
Like all over Africa, bridges.
Strategic locations. Okay.
Exactly.
And hey, I've gotten in trouble taking pictures in Victoria Station in London because of security concerns. So.
Oh really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you would be surprised.
That was one of the things that they didn't want you to photograph, but the other thing was also, like, they didn't want to portray a negative image of Sudan. So anything that somebody might think that they don't want to show, for example, there were some street children sometime, or like some beggars, like you cannot take a picture if one of these people is there. A few times it happened to me that like a few kids came to talk to me and they wanted to take pictures, and I didn't even realize that they were street kids. They look like kids to me. I don't know how to differentiate them there because it's not my culture, so I don't really know the difference. Sometimes they look normal to me, and I took some pictures of them, and then the elders of the town which were around started to get a bit angry at me. Then I had to stop.
Because they were afraid that you were going to publish pictures that showed Sudan in a negative light. Interesting.
Yeah. But it was interesting that these people, that they were not policemen or military personnel. It was just like normal people in the street. So maybe they are told to protect their country that way. I have no idea.
Well, I've run into that other places, and I can't think of where that I was told, be thoughtful about where you take pictures because of that sort of issue. Actually, I think it was China, but...
China. Yeah, China is also a bit sensitive, I guess, with the pictures.
Interesting. Now, you know that one of the questions I usually ask is, what do the guidebooks recommend that you didn't get that excited about? I didn't get the impression you spent a lot of time in the guidebooks. First of all, you had a guide with you.
Yes, we had a guide with us. I did have a guidebook, and I checked like a few things because the first days in Khartoum we were on our own. Like this happened a few times that we were on our own. We can do whatever we
Got it.
wanted.
And which guidebook were you using?
I was using Lonely Planet.
Okay. I wasn't sure what else was available in Sudan, but okay.
Yeah, no, it was not a Lonely Planet about Sudan specifically, but like the whole African Lonely Planet that we had with us.
Got it.
So
Okay.
it was like a small section about Sudan, and then I was also checking an app on my mobile that had some stuff, but I don't remember the name of the app right now. I think it was Trip Wolf.
Okay, sure. I'm familiar with the Trip Wolf app. How would you edit the next version if you had a chance to give feedback to them?
Two things that I remember reading on the guide that I was not super excited about. One of them was the junction between the Blue Nile and the White Nile River, which we saw on our way to the camel market. And it's just like a junction of any
It's
river.
a junction of two rivers. It might be very
Yeah.
historically significant, but you didn't find it particularly impressive. Okay.
And at the same time, you cannot even take a picture because like there's a bridge next to it, so you might go to jail. So at
funny.
the same, it's just seeing a junction of a river. I didn't find it very special. We have seen something that was much more interesting before on the trip in Ethiopia. You can see the source of the Blue Nile, and that was great. Not only for the significance of being the source of the Blue Nile, but all the landscape was amazing. It was through a huge waterfall. That was really, really, really nice. But the other one was just a junction. I'm not sure if it's worth your time.
Okay.
The other thing, which I didn't particularly enjoy, but I guess that you cannot leave it out of the guidebook, was we visited two museums there in Khartoum. Well, I'm not a huge museum fan, and it was not a bad museum. Well, I didn't find it so interesting, especially because after that you're going to see the real things on the real places.
Okay.
So I don't know. Like for me, it was a bit redundant. Also,
And this
because
was Cultural History Museum?
Yeah, it was a lot of history about the Nubian
Got it.
Empire, which was very, very similar. Probably if you're an expert, there will be like a word, like it will be like a huge difference between them. But like I'm not an expert on the subject, so to me, Nubian culture and Egyptian culture seem really, really similar. They
are highly interrelated too. So
yeah. So for me, it was not super interesting.
And was the information accessible? I mean, was there enough English information for one thing?
There was not a lot in English.
Okay.
That was the other thing. We were lucky. We had like a separate like a city guide. No, we had a city guide. She spoke English. She was very good as well. Mariam, she was her name, and she was very knowledgeable. And she took us to these places, but also to see the real life. That's what I like the most, especially if I go to a country like Sudan. I prefer not to spend so much time in the museum, but actually getting to know the people, how they live, and the real thing, how people live on that place.
Sure. And I am a museum person, and I would probably love the museum. But on the other hand, give me a market, and I can take all afternoon. For one thing, especially if I could take pictures. So,
yeah.
And then, what did they leave out? What would you want to make sure that people remember to see that you did not read in there?
One of the actually highlights for me was the ferry we took from Sudan to Egypt, and it was not because we were leaving the country. That was not the reason. It was like an amazing experience in itself. And although the guidebooks mention this ferry, they only mention it as Lonely Planet has the section on how to get into the country, how to leave the country,
Sure.
like by airplane, by car, whatever. So it's mentioned there as a way to leave Sudan without taking a plane, because the only way to get to Egypt from Sudan is with this ferry that goes once a week, because the road is closed. It's only for military access.
And is the ferry, I'm a little unclear, the ferry is going across Lake Nasser?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
It takes about 24 hours, inshallah, because you never know actually with this ferry.
You just went into Arabic fairly naturally there. Do you want to translate that? Because I think I know what you're saying, but I don't know that everyone's going to.
That's like one of the first words that you will learn
Exactly.
It's more than a word. I would say it's a
an
concept.
expression too. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And when you go to any Arabic country, you will hear that, and like they will say inshallah, which means God willing. So like
right, it really means it'll take 24 hours or not,
or more. Yeah,
or more.
We never know. So yeah, they say that a lot. Like, can we get this? Can we get a pizza with tomato? Yes. Inshallah, and then they bring you sandwich. So God didn't want me to have a pizza.
Well, that's good to know. It's really important to have that distinction.
Yeah, the trip in itself was was amazing. You live from this little town that is called Wadi Halfa, which is in the north of Sudan, at Lake Nubia.
Oh, okay.
The Egyptian part is called Lake Nasser. So you board the ferry there. We had to wait for a few days on the town because you don't want to be late for your ferry because it leaves once every 7 days. So
got it. Okay.
So we wanted to be a few days earlier there. And the town is also very, very small, very, very basic, this one. But it was interesting to just meet people. And then the ferry, it was just funny. It was, even the brochure, the picture of the ferry on the ticket looks awful. And that's like the marketing picture that they choose for their ticket. So when we bought the ticket and we thought like, wow, this is the best picture they got from the ship. It looks really rusty and it looks like it's going to sink at any moment. But I don't know, like it didn't sink. It's been crossing the lake for like a lot of years. So I don't know. It's just an experience, I guess. But it was so interesting. It was full of people, everybody dressed in a very different way, very with traditional clothes, the women, the men. Getting into the ferry was very chaotic. Like people was just like throwing bags and boxes overboard. Like a lot of people from Egypt come and buy stuff and then they sell it in Egypt. So like a lot of people with boxes. Some of them were just throwing the things from the pier, trying to put them through the windows in the boat, and like a few boxes even fell into the water. It was just like crazy. Huh. But it was like a really interesting experience.
And actually, you're reminding me, for people who think that that is an intriguing sounding experience, I've got a great book recommendation, and that is Lunatic Express. And it's a book written by somebody who basically went all around the world on that type of ferry or train or bus. The one that you're always hearing about, you never hear about until it sinks or something like that. The one that basically, especially in that part of the world, is really what people use. It's the lifeblood of that particular region. So he basically went around the world on all the ones that he just heard that the previous one had sunk or something like that.
Wow.
So fascinating story. So Lunatic Express. If this story sounds interesting, read that one. Excellent. Right. Your best day in Sudan. What did you do?
The best day was probably the one that I mentioned about the pyramids. That was just magical. If that was the only thing that I would have done in Sudan, I would be satisfied with my trip. It was just amazing. But another awesome thing that I did, we did a lot of bush camping. Okay. And that was really nice. It was a nice experience because... And
you were doing camping most of the way up and down Africa from the truck.
Exactly. Yeah. Only when we're staying like in a rather bigger city, we would just maybe go to a hostel or something like that, or a small hotel. But in a lot of the regions, we were just pitching our tents on the side of the road behind a dune or something.
And I should ask, we haven't got into this yet, and we're going to talk a little more about your adventure later. Mm-hmm. Is this something that somebody else can do if they wanted to do what you did? Is this it's not a regular tour?
Yes, there's some companies that offer these kind of tours. This kind of trip is called like overlanding because you do it with one truck and
right.
camping and stuff like that. And there's a few. Intrepid is one. Dragoman is another one.
Okay.
African International is another one, for example. And it's a very interesting type of traveling. Mm-hmm. You have to be comfortable with traveling for quite a few hours on the truck, pitching your tent.
And you have to have some time.
And you have to have, if you want to do the whole thing, yes, it took us about 5 months to do the whole thing.
And I have to ask, with 5 months, it's not that expensive per day because of the style of travel, but that's got to add up over 5 months.
Yeah, over 5 months. Because Africa is also not that cheap sometimes.
It depends. It depends, yeah.
It depends what you're doing, right? But, for example, if you're going somewhere doing some safari, like the entrances there are really expensive.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially if you're not a local.
Yeah.
Often there's a local price, but you're not.
I'm not. Yeah. I would say that you would spend about, in this kind of trip, with everything included, I would say $2,000 per month.
That's really actually pretty reasonable, all things considered. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But you do a lot of stuff, yeah.
My picture of Sudan, and I don't know if this is at all the right mental picture, but I'm picturing a lot of sand and a lot of beige.
You are right.
Okay. The cartoon I'm picturing is beige. The road is beige.
Let's combine it with beige and a little bit of gray from the tarmac on the
Okay,
road, and
okay.
you have a pretty accurate picture. Like, and maybe some palm trees next to the Nile. Like a few times when we were
Sure. Mhm.
we were following the road, and the road was following basically the Nile. Like sometimes it was a bit closer, you can see it. Sometimes you could not see it.
If I had to ask you what the most beautiful spot you saw, though, in Sudan was, where would it be?
Well, for me in particular was, I think, sleeping on the middle of the desert. One of the nights we just, because there's different kind of desert as well. There's like the one that is really sandy, and there's one that is just like really, really dry earth. And one of the times we were on this really sandy, nice one, we pitch our tents there, and you can see the sky really, really clear because there's no moisture, there's no lights around, there's no city nearby, and you could see the sky. It was absolutely beautiful, and we went for a little walk with my girlfriend. Advice would be not to go too far because we just went walking for a little bit, and we left. Well, the people on the camp, or when we were camping, they left the light of the truck on.
Okay. So you could find your way back. Okay.
Yeah, so we thought like, yeah, that's fine. We just walk and then we'll find it. Besides, I know that I'm walking exactly with this angle, and then we just go back. It's easier, right? But it's not. And actually, it's really easy to lose your truck. When we're coming back, we were supposedly following the same footsteps that we took to get there, and suddenly the truck. There was no light where the truck was supposed to be. There was just like more sand and more sand and more sand. And yeah, we started to get a bit nervous. After a while, we kind of like found that it was actually like 300 meters to the left, and we found our way. But yeah, it's tricky.
Now, in terms of one warning you would give about going to Sudan, you should know this.
I would say don't pitch your tent next to the palm trees.
Okay, you have to tell that story. Because that seems like that would be a perfect place to pitch your tent. There in the oasis. And
yes, we had this very romantic idea. Oh, why not? We're in the desert, there's the Nile, there's the palm trees. Let's just put our tents somewhere near here. But it's not a good idea. I think that it depends on the time of the year. But definitely when we were there, it was February, I think. There's a time on the year where there's these little flies that pollinize the date palm trees, right?
Pollinize the date.
And there's millions. There's literally millions of them all over. And when we just stopped with the truck, they started to increase gradually. You see, like 1 fly, 2 fly, 5 flies, and they started getting very annoying, more annoying. And at one point, it was just unbearable. There were like millions of them going all around you. Like some of them were getting in your ear, in your mouth. You were speaking, they were getting in your mouth, in your eye. They were really tiny, very, very tiny. But they were all over. And what we did in the end, because my girlfriend was going crazy, is we tried to improvise some beekeeper kind of outfit with some long sleeves and some scarves that were a bit transparent. And so we spent the rest of the afternoon with that. It was only during the sunset that the flies were really annoying. But that day, it was our turn to cook because we had rotating cook teams on this trip.
Okay.
So that day, we were supposed to cook, but we couldn't even see because there were so many flies. So thanks to these suits that we made, we managed to cook dinner for everyone. Otherwise, it would have been a problem. So stay away from the palm trees.
And then the other story that you had mentioned was taxis in Khartoum.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we took some taxis to, the city, like we said, I think it's big, not huge maybe, but it's big enough. We were going to meet with this friend that I met through the couch surfing website. His name is Mohammed. He invited us to go for lunch near his where he works. So we took a taxi, and it was really, at the beginning, it was a bit of a surreal experience because first it was impossible to move. All the streets were like packed with cars, and like nobody was letting other people pass. Yeah, it was like really locked. And then when we were getting into other streets and you could go a little bit faster, the guy really went quite faster. And maybe we're not used to how they drive. Maybe if you've been to Egypt, you know, like how they drive there. They're really passionate about driving and very skillful, I guess, because like sometimes with that lack of order, like you really need to know how to drive, I guess, to not crash into other cars. So yeah, it was really funny because every time that we were asking like if he was going to the right address, or he was all the time saying like mafi mushkila all the time, mafi mushkila. And then we found out, we asked my friend, and that was like no problem. But At the moment, it was a bit confusing, but it really served for for learning some new Arabic. So after that, we stayed the whole trip doing saying "Mafi mushkila, mafi mushkila." It was really nice.
The most memorable person you met from Sudan?
Well, that would definitely be this person we met in Khartoum, Mohammed.
The city guide.
No, he was not a guide. He was just like you're familiar with the website, right? Couchsurfing.
Sure. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. And he was just like a person that we contact through the website, and we asked him if he wanted to show us a little bit around the city. We wanted to meet someone from Sudan, and besides inviting us for lunch, during his lunch break, he told us a little bit about his story. He was in France for a little bit. He met a French woman there. He got married. Then at night, he invited us to have dinner with them. We met his baby girl and his wife. They were all really, really polite. After that, they took us to the house of a friend of him. And actually, the other people who was traveling with me on this tour, I think they thought that these were friends from mine from all my life. And I was telling them, yeah, let's meet Mohammed. He's a friend of mine. We go for dinner, and after dinner we said like, yeah, let's go to the roof of your friend to smoke shisha. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then they started asking me like, but where do you know this guy from? And we were already in the roof. No, I don't know him. It's just like from the internet. And like they were, they started to freak out a little bit. But like I have experience with couch surfing, and this guy seemed great, and it was great, and he was so friendly, and I'm glad we got to meet him.
Excellent. Before I get to my last three questions, anything else you really want people to know before they go to Sudan?
Two things: one place and one drink. How about that?
Okay, sounds good.
A place that I also remember that was very nice was a place called Musawarat, and it's also another kind of, like I said, there's plenty of ruins and things from either the Nubian, the Egyptian times, or in this case from the Meroian time, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's from these same ruins of the Meroe. There was an empire called the Meroians, I guess. And this was from that period, but it was a different kind of structure. It was like smaller temples, square, with a lot of details on the walls, a lot of carvings. And this place was also really interesting for that reason, because it was different, but also because maybe we got lucky. I'm not sure that every person that goes there is going to see this. But near that place, there was a well, and we can see how the local people was coming to get water for their cattle. And it was not easy. How they were taking out the buckets. They were pulling. They were using cows to pull out the buckets, and they were rotating the cows. And you could see how precious the water is there, and how difficult it must be to live in this environment. So that was something that I appreciate seeing as well.
Excellent. And one drink, you say?
And the other drink, I would say, we got introduced to this there, although I think that in some other countries in the Arabic world, they may also have it. It's called karkade, and it's basically, the name in English is hibiscus tea.
Hibiscus tea, okay.
Hibiscus tea, yeah. And they do have it a lot there. They have it cold, and they have it as a tea. They have it warm. And that was, I think, my favorite drink there. I was having that all the time.
Excellent. Yeah, Sudan not being a place to go if you want to try a beer.
No, definitely not. Alcohol is absolutely forbidden. You cannot find it anywhere. Although, ironically, we stopped at what it was called El Beer.
Okay.
We definitely took a picture there.
Excellent. Last three questions. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Sudan.
When we were doing the check-in for the ferry in Wadi Halfa, everybody was pushing, moving, trying to get ahead of the next person. And when I got to the front, basically, about to enter the ship, there was no gate or anything. It was just like you were on the pier, and the door of the boat was there, and there was like a bit of a gap, maybe 30 centimeters, maybe a bit more, I don't know. But like it was the water just under there. And the guy who was checking the passports and pushing the people was checking your passport just there, basically with one foot on the ferry and with one on the pier. And I was thinking like, oh my God, I don't want this guy to lose my passport on the middle of Lake Nasser right now, because I will be stuck in Sudan forever, which is a nice country, but like I need to move on. And so I this is one of the perfect moments to say like, only in Sudan somebody will be checking your passport just like a few centimeters from the boat, from where it can fall down. No?
Excellent. And I said 3 questions, but one question I forgot is, when did you feel closest to home? What was most familiar in Sudan? And when did you feel furthest from home? When was it totally foreign?
Closest to home, I would say maybe when we went to the house of Mohammed. Not that night when we had the shisha, but like 2 nights later, we went again to say goodbye. We had some coffee with them. Yeah, it felt like they were friends from forever. They just brought some coffee, some cookies, and we were talking about like the same things that you would talk with anybody else.
People are people. Okay.
People are people, exactly. And there I felt I could be at home.
Okay.
And furthest away from home, probably when I had to dress as a beekeeper to cook.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't do that often here.
Finish this sentence. You really know you're in Sudan when what?
When you don't have to ask for the menu because you know they only have falafel.
Okay.
This doesn't apply to the bigger restaurants, but like for most of the small ones, like you don't even have to bother asking. They only have falafel and pita bread.
Interesting. And if you had to summarize Sudan in 3 words, which 3 words would you use?
Sand, beige, pyramids.
Excellent. And Nicholas, we mentioned you were from I Quit, but we didn't mention what that was. Can you tell us a little more about the I Quit project?
I Quit is basically the short for the full title of our series, which is I Quit, Searching Outside of Your Comfort Zone. Mm-hmm. And it's a travel series that we're trying to produce with all the material that we recorded on our trip across Africa. It's a series with 8 episodes. And in the series, we try to show you the whole trip from the very south of Africa and how we cross it overlanding to the very north of Africa. And this is one aspect. And the second one is a bit of a personal quest on finding some answers that I was looking for when I was in my life in Ireland.
Okay. And then we'll have a link to that in the show notes. It's a Kickstarter project you didn't mention, so people can help you out if they are interested in that project. Excellent. Well, Nicholas, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your adventures in Sudan.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
In the news of the community, I heard recently from Jim McDonough. Jim commented in the Amateur Traveler Facebook community on the episode about the Russian Far East and said, very interesting show. We visited Russia in 2009, only getting as far as St. Petersburg. Our tour group, Rick Steves, went from Helsinki to St. Petersburg by train. We were told that when the train crossed the border, the dining car and restrooms would be locked, and we had to remain in our seats. Officials came through and collected entry cards and our passports. The train then got underway. We were in Russia without passports. After a while, the border cops brought back the passports and amused themselves trying to pronounce our names, which they absolutely could not in most cases. My theory is that they gathered up the passports because they had no automatic readers and had to write everything down. St. Petersburg is the most foreign place we've ever been. I can see that Asiatic Russia would be stranger still. We took a train back to Helsinki on our own after the tour ended. Getting back to Finland was almost like being home. Thanks, Jim, for sharing that. I announced recently a private Facebook group, amateurtraveler.com/trip, where we're deciding where we're going to go for an amateur traveler trip this year or next. Most people aren't going to be able to make it till next year, although it looks like there probably will be a trip this year, and right now the leading candidate is Morocco. So if you're interested in an amateur traveler trip, either that one or some other place, go to amateurtraveler.com/trip and get your vote in before we decide. Remember again, if you're in the market to save some money while you're traveling, amateurtraveler.com/credit card. And if you're planning your travel, you can still go to amateurtraveler.com/tours to save money on day tours. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com or leave a comment on this episode. If you'd like to tell people on Twitter how much you're enjoying the show, go to amateurtraveler.com/love for a pre-populated tweet that will do just that. As always, thanks so much for listening.